and just call out there in the latest version of the PowerShell SQL Server PowerShell module, there are 4 new data classification commandlets you may want to take a look at. They're pretty interesting. Obviously, this is the first time they've put this in, and I can't wait to see where this goes. I just want to show you a sample execution of them in the AdventureWorks database, and you can see how it emits out some results from this database, giving us the column. So basically, schema, table, column name, information type, and then sensitivity label. So far, the only 2 sensitivity labels I've seen are confidential and confidential GPDR, but there might be more in there. I just don't know. I just started playing with them earlier this week. I definitely think you should take a look, and if you need to, worry about data governance and masking your data and things like that. So there you go, new SQL sensitivity commandlets. With that out of the way, oh, and by the way, you have to run update module SQL Server to get the latest ones of those from the gallery, and then you'll be all set. With that out of the way, I will go ahead and turn it over to Ben. All right,
great.
To your screen, and I'm going to go ahead and mute out.
Okay, great. All right, let's do, yep, there we go. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about in tips and tricks and things like that, but this presentation will hopefully give you a flavor for some things that you would do more than just play with PowerShell. There's a lot of content out on the web, and there's a lot of content from PAS on PowerShell as well in the recordings. But this came about from various things where I came across something and it was slow, or I needed some extra information. And so this presentation, I'm going to take probably a little less time on the slides. We're just going to go through and introduce you to the slides. There's only 20 or 21 of them. And then we're going to go right into demo, because demo is where you see it. I've found that there's a lot more people who enjoy demos with PowerShell more than they do slides, because you can talk about PowerShell, but you really can't do it justice unless you actually see what actually is going on. So it's kind of a little nicer to see that kind of scenario. So with that, we're going to get started with our tips. So the first tip is a profile. So the most important thing, I think, in my opinion, of getting started or getting you to a point where you can actually utilize PowerShell well without a ton of typing, is to set up a profile. Now, those of you who are in my age group, I grew up in DOS world where computers began and played a lot with the command line, so I learned to type well. And then there was the network era where Novell NetWare came into play, and then we had Windows NT. All of them began in the world of profiles, or as we called them, login scripts. And those purposes of login scripts were to map drives, to map printers, to get your environment set up where when you logged in, you didn't have to go and click your way through or type your way through all of these setups because they were in your login script. So profiles act as a login script to your environment. So this is probably one of the most important. The tips on the screen really are all about knowing where the profiles exist, and we'll show you where those are, using it to preload your environment, which means make it efficient in that you don't want to load it up with things that take 5 minutes to load unless you're going to actually use it in every session. Then you'll just have to deal with the time it takes. The $ profile is an intrinsic variable in PowerShell. So that will show you where your private profile is, which means the one that you get when you log in, not the one that is global to where everybody logs in. They get that. But you can set up both if you wish. The private one loads first and the public one loads second. So you can do whatever you wish to set those up. So we will show you in demo how you get this set up and what kind of things you can put in your profile, and then we'll go from there. The second thing that I put in my profile, but you can start it or do anything you want with it out on the command line, and that is a transcript. Those of you who have ever watched a court show know that there's a transcriber or a court reporter up front that will record everything that goes on in the courtroom. And at any given time, anybody can say, can you read back this? And verbatim, they will read back exactly who said it and what was said. And that's what a transcript is for you. You can run multiple transcripts at the same time, which you shouldn't, but you certainly can. There's a start transcript, and the really easy part is there's only one parameter called path, and you put a path to it, including the file name, and it will then start transcribing everything that goes on in your automation. The benefit isn't necessarily that you get to start this up and you start typing and you do an interactive session like we're going to do. It's more about automations that you may run headless, where you don't see what's going on because you're not at the screen. It's running behind the scenes. When you get done and you stop transcript, it will close that file, and then you can go and look and see what your automation did. So the tip here is to, number one, use it. Number two, you add it to your profile so that every time it's ready. And I'll show you how I did that in mine.
Hey, Ben.
Yep.
Don't forget, it also traps those error messages in there in the transcript file as well, which is super helpful for trying to figure out if you ran into an error before.
Yep, for sure. So those things are also helpful. The error messages don't show the red because they're just text, but at least you have them so you can see if a command didn't run or did run. And if it didn't, then you can see what actually came out of it. So it's really kind of handy. So this one is a performance-based one, arrays versus ArrayList. There is an array intrinsic type inside PowerShell that's just there. The benefit to PowerShell is that it runs on .NET, and this also applies to .NET Core. The collections ArrayList is a .NET data type that allows you to put things inside the ArrayList. The difference here is that the arrays inside PowerShell are immutable, which means they get recreated every time you change it. It means they can't be changed without recreation. So if you have an array of 1,000 items, and we're going to show this in the demo of what the performance looks like, but this is my favorite one to show because it's very poignant in how it looks. But an array list is a collection that dynamically expands with memory. So you can add and subtract items from there, and it doesn't actually recreate the collection. It actually just adds dynamically to it. So I like this. If you're ever going to use a collection over 100 items and you're going to try to do that and keep it in memory and use it, you'll probably want to use an array list instead. And again, this will be shown in demo at length so that you can just see what that means to you, but it'll be important for you to understand it. StringBuilder is the next item that is a .NET object type as well, that is meant to keep you from plussing strings together. Now, the plussing strings together is another problem because they destroy and recreate as well. The strings, on the other hand, are a little bit more performant by plussing them together because they only deal with 2 items. They never deal with throwing the entire array away, although you could have a string that's 64K and it would then destroy it and recreate it with 1 more character. But they've optimized this pretty high for performance. So I haven't been able to see, and I'll show you in demo, the difference between the string plus and the string builder. But the big benefit is that you get a memory buffer as well. So if you're creating emails, if you're doing HTML pages, you're building them on the fly with data that you get out of your string or out of your PowerShell, this is a little more handy in that it has format and append lines, so you don't have to add extra stuff. So I'll show you in demo how this works. But String Builder is another cool object. It also works in .NET Core, so you can do it across platform now with the PowerShell sticks on the Linux boxes as well. Getting loaded assemblies, this may not be handy for many, but I found it to be handy when things go wrong. So knowing about how PowerShell works and that it uses an app domain App domains are basically a memory space for .NET. Every time you fire up a .NET app, and no matter where you fire it up, it automatically creates an app domain under the covers. That is the memory space for .NET, and it keeps all of the stuff that you do, new objects, the destroyed objects where they are immutable. They keep in there until the garbage collection comes around and gets them. So it's total .NET. It happens both in .NET Full and .NET Core, so you still have to care. But sometimes it's helpful when you're running, especially PowerShell against SQL using SMO. It's really important to understand what assemblies are actually loaded and what you're going to expect to get out of them. So I use this app domain, current domain, and then get assemblies, and I'll show you that as well to get the data out, just to see what's loaded, to show you how things work. So we'll do that as well. Removing objects. This is a little thing that is very interesting in PowerShell. There's a lot of dynamic nature in PowerShell that is fascinating. But the one thing that happens when you use SMO or when you use a collection, if you ever try to change the underlying collection in a pipeline, you'll get an error. So this tip is really about if you have files that you want to delete or you have tables you want to delete, you need to do something different to get them in a different list, either by name or by URN or something, or pipeline them into a commandlet that accepts pipeline input. Then you can do it. So you could create your own function that accepts pipeline input from a collection of tables into a delete or a remove item. But I'll show you a different way to do this to make it a little simpler when you want to remove items. But just know that this is a problem. I'll demonstrate it to show you what I mean by this, but it's something to be aware of. I've gotten bit many times just not thinking of trying to remove an item out of a list, and the collection is modified and it has a cow. So we'll put that to rest when we show you the demo. This is another one that I've been asked a lot in all my pre-cons and all my sessions I've done at Intersections and PASS and all the other places, is what editor do I use and what editor should I use, and all those other great questions. And the spoiler is on the bottom where we say it depends. So we play Paul Randall and we make sure that you understand that really in this case it comes down to something that it has to be about a tool that you're going to use all the time. So if you're going to use integrated scripting environment, by the way, is no longer being developed. It's kind of dead. They've now moved on to VS Code, and they have a third-party add-in for that, and they also have a third-party editor in the Visual Studio. There are lots and lots of other editors. Some people use Notepad, and then they just execute it in their in their console window. The reality of editors are you need to figure out what tool you're in the most. If you're doing Python and you're doing some other stuff, you might do VS Code. The benefit to VS Code is that it's cross-platform, so it does work on both Linux and Windows, so you have the option of picking. There are a lot of paid-for editors, and to have full disclosure, I use a paid-for editor myself, just because I do enough PowerShell that sometimes VS Code and Visual Studio are not where I'm at, and I'm doing something specifically for PowerShell. The other benefit that as my third-party editor has is that it lets me compile a Windows form in PowerShell, lets me build it. And so I get a benefit of making it look like Windows code, but I get to write PowerShell behind the scenes. Not that I couldn't write C#, but that's what I do. So it depends on this one. Whatever makes sense for you. If you're in an editor a lot and you just want to then dovetail into PowerShell, then that's great. Use that. If you're just doing demos, stuff like that, ISE is great. I haven't used the ISE a lot for demos. You'll see me not use via the ISE today because we're going to play a little bit in the SQL Server provider, and the SQL Server provider apparently does not interact always awesome with ISE and will block keystrokes. So it's just my preference. Loading assemblies, you're going to see this. You're not going to get away from this in a lot of the worlds of whether you create your own assemblies. I've done that. I've created my own assemblies, and I do not load them in the GAC. But you'll see the command pardon me, you'll see the command a lot out on the web. Reflection.assembly and load, or load with partial name, will be the most common one. That's nice, but just know that reflection.assembly load with partial name has been deprecated, so it is not a continued thing. They can remove it at any time. They haven't removed it yet, so it still works. But I'll just tell you the behaviors of these two things. There's add type, which is the PowerShell way. The load with partial name will load the latest one in the GAC. So if you have 5 versions of SMO or 5 versions of assembly because of different versioning, if you just do load with partial name, you're only allowed to do a weak name. So you're only allowed to say like Microsoft SQL Server SMO. You can't tell it a version. You can't tell it you want to load a specific one. You have to use the whichever one is in the GAC. Now, with the advent of the new SMO assemblies that get side-loaded, or I'm trying to think of the name, packaged with the SQL Server module, they're all part of the module. So those versions aren't actually in the GAC. So if you want to load specific ones in a package, you need to load at a different way. So add type makes that pretty simply because it does have a path that you can specify as well. So knowing that you can't specify a version, sometimes that can break your automations. If someone installs a later version and your automation runs and it's not ready to use that latest version, and say a property was deprecated that you're using, that would blow your automation up. So sometimes you need to be more specific. So add type can load files, it can load assemblies, it can load ones in the GAC as well, but it requires a strong name, or in SQL Server's case, you should use a strong name. When you add type, we'll show you what it does when you don't use a strong name and use a weak name instead. So use add type to load assemblies. That's the tip. Modules. This is my favorite one in that there are so many people that are DBAs that really have no desire to learn PowerShell coding and do lots of SMO stuff. So the idea is that there are tons of modules. That one of them was spoken of in the beginning, where the next session in 2 weeks is about Excel, import Excel. That's a module that lets you do some things in Excel without having Excel installed, which is huge in a lot of worlds of the DBA stuff, because one of the largest databases in the world is Excel, right? I mean, we have so many spreadsheets in the world that have data, and they're just crazy, but they're a great way to structurally put data. And sometimes you have to use that. So a module that does that for you, you didn't have to write that. Somebody else did. Somebody took the time to do that. So we have DBA Tools at dbatools.io, over 400 commands that you can use. And lots of them do some simple things. And there's lots of them that do really hardcore things like migrate databases or set up a full availability group, things like that. So those are really key. The cool thing about this module topic is that you didn't have to write it. Now there's bugs everywhere, right? Somebody will find a bug, and the good thing is DBA Tools is managed by the community and built regularly. So if you have an issue, you go to the issues on GitHub, you file the issue, and someone picks it up and fixes the bug and releases a new pocket of tools. So and then you just update the module DBA Tools. The SQL Server module is written by SQL Server team, the tools team, and this supplants the SQL PS. So you guys might be familiar with SQL PS, which was deprecated a long time ago in 2016 and isn't being developed anymore and should not be part of your repertoire. The big benefit of SQL PS, and I'll just throw that out just because there is a benefit to somewhat, in that every SQL Server that gets installed does have SQL PS module installed with it, because they haven't been able to divorce it yet. Hopefully in 2019 they divorce it, but we'll see if they do. But SQL PS is there, so if in a pinch, if you need something, the SQL PS module is always also there. And SQL Server module does not get installed with tools. It doesn't get installed with the SQL Server, so you don't have the benefit of having that scenario. But once you install it, you get the new modules or the new commandlets, as Aaron spoke about. Also, there's a lot of commandlets in there to help you manage things. The big benefit to DBA Tools and SQL Server modules are that they load SMO for you. So you don't have to go and do the add type or the other stuff. It just happens because you install or you imported the module into your session, and it automatically loads those SMO modules for you. So that's really good. It is on the PowerShell Gallery, and there are tons of other modules that are on the PowerShell Gallery and scripts that you don't have to write. You have to test them. I would not recommend just blanketly going running them against a production system unless you really don't care. But typically you'll test those first. But the tip here is that there are so many commands that you don't have to write, but you get for free typically, and you get to go and use them, and you have the full power of PowerShell doing some logic around them, and they will return error messages or they'll return objects for you, and you just import the module. It's fantastic. If you are so inclined, you get to bring your own objects. So there are many ways. I'm going to show you a few ways to get your own objects in demo, so I'm not going to belabor this topic. Just know that there are hash tables. There are custom objects, which we call PS objects or PS custom objects. And then there are objects that you get that you can augment. You can actually take an SMO server and add a member to that object and carry it around with you. So it's really kind of slick that you can do whatever you want to an object you create inside PowerShell. So you get the options of doing that. Gathering data and putting it in a table, I use this a lot. And there are two ways to push data into a table today. I mean, there's several others, but two really good ones. One is in DBA Tools, and it is write DBA data table. And in the SQL Server module, there is a write-SQL table data that will let you pass in a set of data and tell it to put it in a table. And both of them offer the option to have the command create the table if it doesn't exist. So you can grab data from every source, put it in your custom objects, put it in your data table, and then push it to SQL with these two ways. And there's other ways, but these two are the ones that are most prevalent. Controlling agent. So agent is now inside the SQL Server module, which is fantastic. We asked that a while ago, and they did comply and give us many agent commands that you can manage jobs, stop and start. You can actually do a lot of things with this one tool instead of going into Management Studio. The big benefit of this is that SMO has great agent support, and you can do lots of things such as create a new job, create a new step, add a new step, change a schedule. I mean, it's fantastic. And these are all available now. Instead of having to write your own SMO code, SQL Server now has agent commandlets that can get job history, it can stop a job, start a job, and things like that. So that's a really cool tip. SP configure, the big tip about this is that many times, and I've done this my whole career, is you inherit a server or you start up a new SQL Server and you want all the configuration items to be the same as your other server. So say you're in a platform where you set all these config parameters like max memory, you set your max DOP, you set your cost threshold for parallelism, you set your optimize for ad hoc workloads. All of these settings come badly configured out of the box. And that's a decision on the Microsoft SQL Server team to not change that as maybe a breaking change or maybe interjecting things that wouldn't be good in your environment, and they rely on the DBA to actually know what they're doing. So in this case, I create a PowerShell script that basically does my configuration for me. And I use SMO, so you could write this in T-SQL and do SP configures if you wished. But basically the option for me is that I take the configuration collection off the server and I set all my values, and then I do a server.configuration alter, and the SMO will generate all the T-SQL necessary for that version of SQL and put them out there and change my config settings. So if I get a new server, somebody hands me a new server, if you're in managed hosting where they provide you a SQL server and you get to now configure it, or if you're installing it yourself, These are always after setup. And so it's nice to have a little PowerShell script to go, hey, set my server up the way I expect it to be set up so that I don't have to worry about it and don't have to click my way through all of the settings and click OK. So that's a cool way to do it as well. This is another tip that's becoming not a lot talked about, but I still see it being useful in my automations. There is a set of default init fields on every object in the SMO platform or API that all the default init fields are really not always useful, but anytime you set to get a property outside of that set of default init fields, it will pull a bucket load of stuff from SQL you never care about. If you ask for the ID property of the database, it will go out and get mirroring and availability. It's just crazy how much data it brings back that you don't even care about, but it does it because of the way SMO was written. So to get the ID, you would actually set the default init field for a database to be ID because the default property of that is name, and that's it. So anytime you ask for anything else, it pulls back an enormous amount of data, and that's not helpful. And it causes your automations to run slow. So set default init fields is a cool thing that's off of the server object, and you can tell it what object you want to set the default init field for and give it an array of options to put in there, and it will go grab those by default when you access that object. So it's kind of cool. Hash tables. This is another tip that is useful, and I'm starting to use it a lot more with custom objects and with objects that don't have these properties, but I want them to return, and that is using a hash table. So a hash table basically is a name and value pair, and the display of format table or the reality of a column is that it needs two properties. One is name and one is expression. Now there is a old way to do that, and that's label. So you can do either label or name, and they both work. And then the expression is a script block. You can, as PowerShell lets you, do significant letters and parameters. So because there's no name, the other property with L or N, you can actually abbreviate the name and label to be L equals or N equals, and it will accept that. E equals is for expression. And that just is part of how the select object and the format objects allow you to do that. In reality of a hash table itself, L would simply be L, that's the name. And the E would simply be E, that's another property. That would not be helpful in a normal scenario, but inside format and inside select, you actually get to abbreviate because it understands that. Scripting objects, this is another cool tip that many people don't know about SMO. All objects that I've found on SMO have a script method on the object, and it will generate the script for that object. If you want to script it with certain parameters, or like I want to script out foreign keys and I don't want to script out the go and I don't want to do this, you can create a scripting options object and use that instead, and it will use those options to produce the script. So this tip is really about getting stuff out. I can script out all my tables into a folder and have each individual table in an individual file if I want to, very quickly in a one-line statement. So it's kind of slick to have that script option on an SMO object.
Hey, Ben.
Nate, yep, go ahead.
Just a quick time check that we've got about 24 minutes left. So.
Yep, we're almost done with the slides, and we'll go right into demo and finish out. All right, so naming your functions. If you are inclined to develop or create, then you should learn to follow a verb-noun. If you want to know what verbs PowerShell team has accepted as valid verbs, you can do a get-verb, and it will tell you all the verbs that they like. If you create a module and the verbs are not in those lists, so if you use get me as a verb, it will warn a person importing a module that there is a verb that is not in the list, and it makes your functions less discoverable. That's all it is. It doesn't keep you from creating it, but it is nice to do verb-noun, get-instance, get-database, stuff like that. So just know that that's a little tip in making your commands more discoverable. We're not going to really talk about PSModulePath, except to say that there is an environment variable in the system called PSModulePath with key, which is kind of like your path in your Windows or in any environment where your path is searched when you execute a command. The PSModulePath is the path searched when you do import module. So if you only want certain places and you want to have a custom place where you put modules, you can modify this PSModulePath either in Windows and have it be part of the system-wide, or you can modify it by just modifying it with env PSModulePath equals something, and it will change it for that session. So that's kind of handy. And the PowerShell Gallery we've already talked about. They're installable from PowerShell 5 by default and 6 also. They don't always have all of the commands if you're running them in PowerShell 6 because it's PowerShell Core, and not all the .NET things are runnable in Core. So if they are functions that are written to use Core, then it'll run. If not, then they won't actually have any commands for you when you import the module. All right, the last one is help. Don't forget to ask for help. There is a thing you need to know that after 3.0, they didn't install the help files by default. So servers that are not connected to the internet, you can do a save-help, save them in a folder to a server that has access to that server internally, and then you point the server that doesn't have internet access to that folder and say update help with the folder, and it will install help from that folder instead of having to never have help on your server. So that's kind of handy. All right. So I guess I forgot. There was one last one, history. Anybody who's done history, I'll show you this history thing in the demo if we get to it. But basically there is a command called get-history that allows you to pull all the history in your window, and it will give you all of the IDs, it will give you the command lines, and it will give you whether it ran successful or didn't. And then you can actually persist that out to a file, and I'll show you how I do that. In the profile, I'll show you I have a function that does that, and it will help you to get the most out of that. So with that, we'll go back into our demo. Hopefully everybody can see this as far as it should be big on your screen. But basically, the idea of a profile, we'll go through the things as decent as we can. I have my profile up here that I'll show you, but this $ profile will show you the profile that you have in your private directory. But here's some of the file names that you have to be aware of. Microsoft.PowerShell_profile is the profile name of your file if you're using the command line, if you're using the executable of the PowerShell window like this. The PowerShell ISE uses a PowerShell ISE_profile, and the VS Code has a VS Code_profile. So you have to be careful about which tool you use and where your profile is for there, and it may not load or may load. But if you're using an automation that uses PowerShell.exe, it'll use this name of the file. So just know that that's the one you want to focus on. The PS home is going to tell you based on whether you executed a x64 or an x86. Just know that these are backwards. The 64-bit is in System32. The 32-bit is in SysWow64. So it's kind of weird, but that's how they named it. But those are your PS home locations, and it will be exhibited that way. Here's the transcript part. So I will show you my profile just to show you how that works. So I get a date with a format. This is -F, but with significance and parameters, I could either do -F or -format. So I get to put a path or a .NET format string. So here's my year, month, day, and I do 24 hours, minutes, and seconds. I figure that I'm safe to do seconds instead of having to go to milliseconds, but if I wanted to, I could do _NNN, and that would be my milliseconds if I wanted to. I start transcript with a path, and I just build my path. I take my split path of profile, which will put me in the Windows PowerShell folder of my documents folder, and then I do transcript _ and then replace date.txt. And every time I start a profile or every time I start a window, it'll start that transcript. So if I executed that guy and I just ran my little guy here, all of a sudden I have my transcript started here and all as well. So it's kind of slick. Now the thing to remember out of transcript is that you should always have a practice to do stop transcript. If you don't, you have the potential of having it corrupted. I've had it only corrupted maybe once or twice, and I was using a USB key. So that could be why it was corrupted. but it does kind of leave a file handle open, and you don't necessarily want to do that. So I'll show you a little trick, but here's my profile loading of the history. So the other cool thing is there's an add-history command in my profile that lets me add the history from my saved history. So here's my saved history. I just named it history.clyxml. And it imports and adds the history into my thing so I can actually reference my previous history. Now, when I exit, I have a little guy here that says where execution status is completed. And then I export it out to my history clyxml. So I get my history, pipe it to where execution status is completed. And because I don't want the errored ones. If it failed, I don't want to have that in my history. So I do that. So I stop my transcript, I get my history, and I exit. Now, this exit me, I could either type it, because I created my own function. I could type exit-me, which is 3 more characters than exit. So why would I want to type more, right? So I've faked it out by doing a function here in invoking an expression that does function char4, and it calls exit me. So if anybody knows what char4 is, there's points. You can put it in the questions if you want, but char4 is basically a control D. So now I have 2 keystrokes instead of 4 to get my exit. So instead of typing exit, I do control D. Well, then I hit enter. Oh, there's 3 keystrokes, but it's still 1 less than exit. So it will call exit me. It will do my stop transcript for me, and it will get history and exit. The bummer is that there's no way to hook into the Windows X button. So if you have a window here and you go to click the X, there's no way in PowerShell that I found or anybody else has found to tie into the application exiting event and then close my transcript and do the things I want. So I had to fake it out and do my own thing. This is out on the web. Some guy figured out a cute way to do that, and so I named my function my thing, but I did the control D, so that's kind of handy. The other cool thing that you can do inside anywhere, even in a profile, but I do it in my profile because the default prompt is just the command, right, which is kind of ugly. So prompt, if you create a function called prompt, it will then do whatever you want to do. And so when you saw me exit my or enter my PowerShell thing here, you notice that my let's do this. You notice that my Windows System 32 administrator is up on the top, and then my Ben at DBA Duck1, which is my machine name, I think. And then I have my transcript started. And then here's my prompt here. So you notice there's 26:11:45, and then there's a colon, and then there's some time thing here. That's interesting. And then there's my path. So now I get my profile here, and my prompt also tells me how many items are in my history. So now I just get a £, and there's my prompt. So I don't have to have, if my path was all the way into System Win32, or it's all the way into my Documents Windows PowerShell folder, my path is all the way into here, which is not, it's not helpful to do that. So if I had my path here, see, notice I still have this, but my path is up here. So now I don't have to worry about my path being all the way into here, and then I'm starting to type right here. So it's kind of handy to have a prompt function that gives me 2 lines for each line. And the benefit of this guy is that this is how long did the last command take to run, which is kind of handy if you're timing things, or if you start an automation, walk away from your desk, lock your machine, come back, and you've been gone for an hour, but it only ran for 10 minutes. It makes it look like it ran for an hour because you only know what time it is. But this little piece lets it execute and tell you how long it took for the previous command. So that's kind of cool. And that's all this. I will make sure this is available. I think I've put it up on my GitHub. My username is DBA Duck, so it's github.com/DBA Duck, and there's a presentations link, and the profile is in there as well. So that's kind of a cool thing. So that's profile. It loads everything I want. If I wanted to load a module, I could do import module SQL Server, import module DBA Tools, whatever I wanted to do to set up my environment, I could do in my profile. So it's kind of slick. All right. So this is the array test. So we're going to create an array, and that's just going to be a regular PowerShell array, and then we're going to measure command, and we're in this command, we're going to do a 10,000 item loop, 1.10,000. That's another little tip, is if you want to generate numbers 1 through whatever, 1 dot dot, or you can do 2 dot dot, and it will start at 2 and go up to this in ones. It's pretty slick. But I pipe that to for each, and I'm just going to add it to the array. So what's going to happen is the array is going to contain nothing, and then it's going to be thrown away and with 1, and then the 1 is going to be thrown away and put 2, and then the 2 array is going to be thrown away and put 3. So it's going to be really iterative, but you'll see what happens when we, I'll just press F8 because I don't remember how to get that done. So notice it's running down below, and it's running and running and running. It's only 10,000. Okay, it finished. It finished in 5 seconds with 957, so almost 6 seconds it took to run, which is, you know, you might think, well, it's 10,000. Come on, give me a break. So we're going to run this guy with an array of new object system array list. I'm going to show you, this is the other way you can do that. It allows, PowerShell allows you to typecast an array into an array list just by this syntax instead of doing new object. So we're going to do new object here, and we're going to do an array add. The reason why I do null is because all .NET, well, not all .NET objects, most of the .NET objects are going to return something. If you just did this statement without the null equals, it would return the array index that it just added. So the first one would be 0, the next one would be 1, 2, 3, and I don't want to see those on my screen, so I just assign it to null so that I don't really care about the output, and I don't have a variable. Null is null, so it just runs. So we're going to run this and see how long it takes. Oops, it's already done, so I didn't even have a chance to expand my window. It took 188 milliseconds to run, no seconds. So this is 5 and 957, and this is 188. Now again, this is just a teeny object. This is just an ID or an int, and so it's really not a lot of data. But imagine if you were putting objects in here, objects that contain 50 properties, and you want 50 of them. That's a lot of data to throw away. So objects with array lists work really well. So here's the string. String, we add strings to variables. We plus them together. What will happen is this plus this object will be put together, and then this object put together will then be thrown away and added this object to this object. So it will do 2 at a time, the first 2 and then the second 2. And then if I had plus, 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 it would just do all the way down. So it's kind of slow, but it is a lot faster. If you want to get away from the immutable object here with a plus, you just do the double quotes, then your variable, and then space and the variable and double quotes, and it will just do a string replace. Or you can do a hash table and do name equals value and stuff like that. So they all work. I'll show you what this does, just so you can see. I basically assigned them and then did this, and it shows Ben Miller and shows Ben Miller. So this works and gives me Ben Miller. This works and gives me Ben Miller. One's just more efficient than the other. So nothing really, in behavior-wise, it doesn't really change. This is for your reference. I'm not going to talk about it because it's not really, I mean, it is a tip to use parentheses, but you'll get the hang of that. This is the StringBuilder object. The bummer is you can't do a StringBuilder object like this because it doesn't work that way. You have to do a new object to get a StringBuilder. And the argument that takes is how big should I make my first buffer? If you overrun 64K, in this case, I think the first is really small. I can't remember how big the original one is. I think it's only like 512 bytes. So it will grow on its own. And that's costly, right? Just like growing a log file, growing a data file. If you let it auto grow, it's slower. That's what it is. So you have the option to do append, which will just append it with no new line. It'll just put a string all the way together. You can do append line, which will then add whatever you put inside the parentheses, and then it will put a new line on it. And then append format will let you use .NET formatting. So you could do something like moniker 0 is a great guy. I'm typing in demo, bad guy, Ben. And what that would do is it would put Ben in here. If I did this is a great one, then I could just do another comma like that. So it lets you do formatting, which is kind of cool. You can do that with the double quoted string like we showed you up here. But it's your choice, however you want to do it. But format is nice. The other benefit of a string builder is you can clear it. So if you're running a loop and you're doing this and you get in to be 60K and you want to clear it, it just clears the memory buffer. It doesn't throw it to garbage collection. It just clears the buffer and starts over. So you can actually keep very performant without having to reset a variable. The app domain current does get assemblies. This is the output. You can see it's pretty big, verbose, but it basically has whether the thing is gacked, what version it is, and the location. There's also a property that doesn't get shown here that's called full name, which will take the full name minus the path. So in the demo, we do a sort by full name and we select only full name. And if we do that, then we will see only this is called the public key, or the strong name. So it has the assembly name, the version, culture, and public key token. The beauty about SQL Server modules, which we don't have loaded yet, which I'll show you in a minute because we're running out of time, but basically this import module SQL Server, if I run that and then run my command again, I will see that I have SMO objects now in here. I have Microsoft SQL Server, and it runs and says version 15100. You'll know that that's a side load instead of a one in the GAC. And I could always go see if I just did this guy right here, if I did the up above one, you'll see that we'll go into the Microsoft SQL Server ones, and it is not GAC'd. So false on the GAC. It actually is loaded from this path. So that's kind of handy to know what your assemblies are doing. Here's what I was going to show you for your multiple objects. So we're going to just go get a server. And this is a little tip I use to not have to type everything here. So if I'm going to create new objects like this and get a server, I put a string called Microsoft SQL Server Management SMO, and I put it in here and just do SMO.server so I don't have to type it everywhere I go. So this will get me a server. And then I'm going to show you, I'm going to get a database here. Oh, server 2, my bad. I get my server, and here's the cool part. So say I wanted to get the names of all my tables. Now, I showed you that you have a collection. If I do name here, dot name, and just execute this, PowerShell is very dynamic in that it will let me see all the names. So here's my names of my tables in that database. And you remember how I told you that if I wanted to delete an object and I did this, if I did this, I'm hoping this will work the way I expect it to. It should error and say, hey, dude, you just did a for each and you tried to modify the collection. Naughty. So you'd think this would work because you're operating on each one, but because it is a collection, it doesn't like the idea of modifying the collection while it's in the pipeline. So instead, we just do a dbtables.drop. We execute that, and what PowerShell will, oh, nice. Oh, it didn't like me because I have a foreign key on my first respondent table, but you'll notice that it didn't error after that. So if I go back into my management studio and I refresh my tables, I should only see respondent one. Oh, it didn't do it. How naughty. I'm going to delete this for, oh, I guess I can't do it. I have a foreign key on this stupid thing. Let me grab that and delete that so that we can now do what I expect. Okay, there we go. So let's go back in here and rerun it just so that you can see what happens and I don't look like dumb. It still didn't like that. Drop. So it still said collection was modified, which I'm not sure why that does that, because that's the way you can do that. We'll have to revisit that later. I'm not sure why that did that. That's how I've done it for a long time, because I've done, oh, you know what? I did that. So tables.drop, I put them into a list. That's what I did. So here's my list. And now I can do list.drop because it's not a collection, and I guess it just still doesn't like me. So we'll table that one, but that's the behavior the benefit of you saw with .name, there is a way to get this drop to work, but I thought I had it in this demo, but it is not in there. So I apologize. Adding assemblies, there's this guy that adds the assembly with the full name. The big benefit of adding an assembly that's a Microsoft SQL SMO one is this is the only thing that changes. The culture neutral and public key token are all the same for all SMO modules. So you can add assembly with a variable in here called version, and that would work great if you pass the version in. So here's the add type with a path. Here's my install module for DBA Tools and SQL Server. And the ones that we'll only have a couple minutes, so I'm going to show you a creation of an object that is really slick when you're doing automations. Say you need first name and last name, and you just want an object to hold those. So you have the option of doing this. You can do object equals new object of a PS object, and then you can add member, but you have to do it once for every property. You can't do add member with an array or anything like that. You have to do add member each time. So if you have 20 properties, you're going to do add member. That's one cycle or more for every time you execute that, rather than just doing a string, empty string, pipe it to select, and you can put all your properties in here, and you end up with an object that is completely viable in your $obj, and I can see first name, last name, and I can set the properties just by doing obj dot first name equals Ben, obj dot last name equals Miller. So that's a big benefit of quickly creating an object to hold data. You don't have to do a special thing. You can do a hash table this way by casting and then doing a name value all the way down, and you don't have to have commas. And you don't have to have anything in here except a line feed. So pretty slick. Here's the agent commandlets from SQL Server. I wish we had more time. Sorry, I took more time on the slides than I shouldn't have. But here's an idea. Here's an example of setting your configuration on the server object of SMO server. There's a configuration collection, and then you just do your property dot config value equals 2, your config value equals 1 or true. In this case, it's 1 and 0. And then after you do that, configuration.alter. Most objects in SMO have alter, that you can alter the object. So you can set page verify, you can set lots of things on your database or your configuration. And this true in the alter just says that any of you who have done the reconfigure with override, that's the with override. If you don't put true in here and you just do alter, it will just do reconfigure. Most people I know just always put the true just to do a reconfigure with override, so it makes that work. So we're out of time. I apologize for not being able to get some of the other things here, but it looks like that's typically where we end. Just know that those tips are out there, and I'll put my slide deck out there on my thing, and I'm sure this recording will be available via the PowerShell group YouTube channel. So with that, I will end my presentation. If there was any questions, I didn't see any questions come in. Or maybe there is one.
One or two just came in the last minute. If you want to pop open the questions there. Yep, we'll try to get this posted up to the YouTube channel just as soon as we can. And
how do I pop out the question? Oh, there we go. All right, so let's see. Oh yeah, wow, there's a few comments in there. I didn't even see them. I apologize. Oh wow. Funny. Let's see. I want ANSI colors. Yeah, nice. Colors in your transcript. That would be great. The session is being recorded. Let's see. Some people want me to continue to present everything. Let's see.
We can do a part 2 in March.
Yeah, we can do that as well. Doesn't look like there's any questions.
Okay.
So it looks like there are lots of comments, which is great, and the scripts will be downloadable. Again, they'll be at github.com/dbaduck in presentations folder, and they're also if they're I don't know how do you distribute them otherwise? You just do the recording, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so they'll be available on github.com/dbaduck,
Right.
Which is me, by the way. But All right.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.